I confess that of all the curious affairs which passed beneath our roof in Baker Street during those crowded years, none has remained with me so vividly as the matter which Holmes himself, with an unwanted touch of poetry, labelled "The Door to Yesterday." It began on a night when the fog lay low and yellow upon the city, the lamps smearing their circles against the murk, and the very hoof-beats in the road sounding as if muffled in wool. I had returned early from my practice to find Holmes cross-legged upon the settee, his long fingers steepled, and his eyes half closed, with that curious inward light which betokened an active mind coiled within a resting frame. "You have mislaid a stout elderly patient with a fondness for barley water, Watson," said he, by way of greeting, without so much as raising a lid. "Come now, Holmes. The smell of golden syrup clings to your left cuff. See how the nap of the cloth is roughened. There is also a pale scum dried upon the edge that is not sugar, but the farinaceous trace of boiled barley. The gait of a person leaning to his right has polished the leather of your medical bag in a single broad crescent. You have, I perceive, offered comfort to a gentleman whose wife overboils his tonics." I could not but laugh, for the diagnosis was, in its essence, correct. "I shall never grow used to it," I remarked, hanging up my coat. "If you were to tell me next that our supper will be interrupted, I should almost believe you." Holmes's reply was cut short by a hasty, imperious rap at the street door below. Mrs. Hudson's step was followed by another, a quicker, more official tread, and in a moment Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard burst into our sitting-room with his hat in his hand and the fog still clinging to his whiskers. "Mr. Holmes, thank the Lord you're in. It's a tidy mess this time, and no mistake," he panted. Holmes indicated a chair with a finger as slender and commanding as a baton. "Compose yourself, Lestrade. Your boots tell me you have been in a garden, clay loam, somewhere beyond the old Kent road, and your sleeve is flecked with soot finer than domestic coal. There has been a fire, perhaps, or the absence of one where its presence should be felt." Lestrade blinked. "If this is a jest, it is ill-timed. The man's cold as a haddock, and yet there's no mark on him. The oddest part, and I dare say you'll like that, Mr. Holmes, is that the room was as yesterday. Everything points to yesterday." "Yesterday?" Holmes's lids lifted the merest trifle. "Pray be explicit." Lestrade leaned forward, his hands upon his knees. "A gentleman of means, Mr. Ambrose Quill, scholar and collector, living alone with a manservant in a detached house near Northumberland Heath. The servant, one Evans, swears that his master dined last night at 8, read in his study till late, and retired. This morning, mind you, there has been a fall of snow. Evans goes to call his master and finds the study door locked from the inside. They force it. Quill lies by the extinguished grate, stiff as if he had been all night in the open. The oddity is that the clock on the mantel is set at noon yesterday, the fire laid as it was the previous afternoon, yesterday's newspaper folded where it had been left, and the calendar untouched. Not a coal burnt down, not a footprint, inside or out, to show any intruder." "The window?" asked Holmes softly. "Bolted within, no marks on the sill. And there's this. Evans swears the master burned a confidential packet after dinner, yet in the grate we find nothing but a little drift of grey ash, fine as flour, and a wedge of uncharred paper that bears no writing at all. It's as if—" Lestrade hesitated, groping for a phrase. "As if the room, like an obstinate witness, preferred to speak of yesterday rather than to tell what befell today," said Holmes. "You interest me profoundly. Did you examine the ash for clinkers?" "I am not a sweep," Lestrade snapped, stung by the tone. "No, but clinkers would have told us of coal. Their absence speaks to paper. Yet you say paper uncharred remains?" Curious, and the body? No bruise, no wound, no sign of violence. The doctor says exposure. Exposure in a room with a laid fire that has not caught, in a house locked, with snow unbroken up to the step. If you ask me, it looks like mischief, but wears a mask I don't recognize. Holmes rose like a spring uncoiled. "Watson, your hat? Lestrade, you did well to come. Before we go, permit me 1 point more. This Mr. Quill, friends, enemies?" "Plenty of both, I dare say. He was mixed up with rare manuscripts. A quarrel a fortnight ago with a bookseller in Holborn named of Tovey over a disputed provenance. A niece, Miss Lydia Quill, who depends on him and isn't best pleased with his will, and a gentleman lodger temporarily installed, Captain Alistair Penrith, lately returned from the East, who is nowhere to be found this morning, though his valise remains in his room." "Ah!" Holmes's keen face took on that hawk-like intentness I knew so well. "3 strands to our rope before we have even seen the coil. Come, Watson." Within a quarter of an hour we were rattling through the fog in a hansom, Lestrade opposite with his coat collar up and his small, sharp eyes glittering. London slid about us in muffled shapes, public houses ruddy in their windows, a drift of costermongers' cries, the Thames breathing its damp into the bones. Holmes was silent save for a low humming that I had learned to associate with thought. Presently he spoke, more to himself than to us. "A room that proclaims the day before, a fire laid but not lit, ash delicate beyond coal, a gentleman frozen in a sealed chamber. There is a simplicity here that has the courage to disguise itself as the impossible." "And what do you make of the missing captain?" I ventured. "Missing. Men are like missing links, Watson, reported chiefly by those whose theories depend upon them. Let us reserve our speculation for the objects that will not be denied. The ash, the clock, the snow." At Northumberland Heath the snow had ceased, but a pallor still hung upon the hedges and roofs. Quill's house stood a little back from the lane, its iron gate flanked by laurel, its stone step brushed clean but ringed with untouched white. Lestrade led us briskly through a narrow hall. I noted a faint fragrance, a sweet, not unpleasing scent I could not at once place, and a damp trace upon the tiles as if a wet parcel had lately been set there and removed. Holmes's nostrils quivered, and he glanced down but said nothing. We came to the study. The door, splintered by a chisel, gaped upon a chamber whose aspect struck me with a shock, as if I had stepped into a photograph taken the day before. The calendar still marked Tuesday. The Times lay with an advertisement half-circled in pencil. The hearth was perfect with kindling and a little pyramid of coal, and beneath the mantel the brass fender shone with yesterday's polish. Ambrose Quill had been carried to the sofa and sheeted. The air had that dead chill which no window admits, an absence, rather than a presence, of temperature. Holmes went first to the grate, bent until his aquiline profile was etched against the unlit coals, and with a finger lifted the film of ash Lestrade had mentioned. It rose like breath and fell without weight. "Exquisite," he murmured. Watson, a surgeon's eye, observed the grain. I bent. The particles were of a uniform paleness and fineness, without the gritty relic which domestic fuel leaves behind. Among them, as Lestrade had said, a wedge of paper lay half buried, edges browned, centre curiously untouched. Holmes did not take it up. Instead, his gaze travelled to the mantel clock. He wound it gently, listening, and then let it tick. He stooped to the carpet and, to my astonishment, smelt the nap near the fender. From there he crossed to the window, examined the bolt, the leading of the panes, and a faint rim of rime upon the inner glass no broader than a farthing. He straightened, and I saw that his eyes had brightened. "Lestrade," said he, "you have described to me a door to yesterday. I propose we discover where it opens." Lestrade hovered by the door. as Holmes moved with that peculiar blend of languor and alertness which always put me in mind of a coiled whip. He took from his pocket lens a turn upon the fine ash, then, with the nail of his forefinger, teased apart the browned wedge that lay among it. The paper, if paper it was, separated with a dry, reluctant whisper, revealing a paler heart scarcely altered by heat. He did not touch it further. Instead, he straightened, drew a slow breath through his nostrils, and let it out as if tasting the room. "There is a sweetness here not domestic," he murmured. "Not flowers, not polish, a volatile note with an oily foot. I shall find its echo elsewhere." He crossed to the door we had forced and bent to the threshold. Even to my less practised eye there were faint grains upon the skirting, no more than a dusting that caught the light when his shadow shifted. He lifted a few upon the blade of his penknife and set them on his tongue with the fastidious distaste of a chemist. "Chloride," said he, "sea salt, coarse at first, now dried to a bloom. The hearth is laid, yet no coal was burned. The cold we feel is not the draught of a careless window, Lestrade, but an importation. Come away, I wish to see the way by which yesterday entered." In the passage he paused where I had earlier noticed a dampness upon the tiles. It had already dried to a darker map with scalloped edges. Holmes knelt so that his cheek was almost to the floor, and with the back of his fingers felt the join between two flags. "It stood here," he said softly as if to himself. "A chest or crate, longer than a man's arm, narrower than his shoulder, set down wet, taken up quickly. The porter was not at leisure, and our odour—" He pressed the side of his hand to the panel of the hall cupboard. "Here it clings." He opened the cupboard, and at once the sweetness grew more pronounced, sickly, a little cloying, with that medical reminiscence which may be found about the cork of a bottle. Holmes found upon the lowest shelf a square of rag, stiffened in places to a glazed translucency. "Chloroform," said he, holding it with thumb and forefinger. "Not much, and not new. It was used to persuade something or someone to indifference. Let us not yet leap, Watson. Send for the manservant." Evans proved to be a square-built fellow with the furrows of long service at the corners of his mouth and eyes that shied from direct inquiry. He stood upon the mat, twisting his cap. "You have been with Mr. Quill long?" Holmes asked, without preamble. "8 years, sir." "And in those 8 years, how many times have you set a fire, and then neglected to strike a match?" "Never, sir. If you please, last night the master said he would sit in the study after dinner and desired no fire. I thought it odd, with the snow coming on, but he would have it." He said the air eased his head. "Ah. You observed him burn a packet after dinner?" "He told me so, sir. I did not see the ashes made." "But you laid the hearth as we see it now?" Holmes's tone did not accuse, it pinned. "Yes, sir, yesterday afternoon, before I went to market." Holmes nodded as if at a line he had already written. "You went to market. Did you return by the lane?" "I did, sir." "To find here a delivery set upon the hall tiles?" Holmes indicated the shadowed stain. Evans's eyes flickered, and in that instant Lestrade made a small sound of triumph. "A crate came," Evans admitted, "from Deacon's, the fishmonger, in Deptford. But it is nothing to do with the master, only a mistake. I sent it away again." "The fishmonger," Holmes repeated, as a man might roll a coin upon his palm. "And the crate came in by the gate, across snow, which you afterwards brushed from the step very neatly. You did not, however, brush the residue of melted brine that slipped between your boards." "When was this?" "Near 10 o'clock, sir." "And the lodger, Captain Penrith?" "He had gone out at 8. He was not in when I retired, nor when I rose. His room is as he left it." "Show me," said Holmes. The captain's chamber, reached by a short stair, had a soldierly order: bed made, valise gaping with shirts of Indian cotton, a pair of field glasses upon the sill, and, what caught Holmes's hawk eye, a pair of india-rubber galoshes set to dry upon a newspaper by the radiator in the passage outside. He lifted one daintily. "Newly wetted last night and dry by morning," he observed. "The sole's smooth, the edges clean. Your boots, Evans, carry the Kentish loam. His carry little. He chose his surfaces carefully." "Meaning?" Lestrade demanded. "Meaning," said Holmes gently, "that a gentleman may go far in London without overtreading snow if he prefers flags, gutters, and stones." He set down the galosh, peered into the valleys, and withdrew nothing. His interest lay in the margins, a smear upon the latch, the colour of old straw, and a scent no stronger than memory. He rubbed the smear between finger and thumb, then lifted it to me. "Tallow or paraffin cut with camphor? A lamp, Watson. Our captain likes his fire to travel." Back again in the study, Holmes went to the window once more. The bolt within was true, the panes tight. Yet his lens lingered upon the inner beading of the lower sash, where the varnish had a fresher gleam along a line as fine as the stroke of a hair. He touched it, then pressed lightly with his nail. A sliver lifted, almost invisible, and fell like a transparent scale. "Reseated," he said, "a pane taken out and put back with a neatness beyond the common glazier. Observe also the rim of rime within the glass, no more than the breadth of a farthing, cold met warm here, not through the room entire, but through this skin. Yesterday stayed within, the night came to the glass." "You talk riddles, Mr. Holmes," Lestrade protested. "Not riddles, summaries. We shall have our text 1 point more." He went to the mantel clock, turned it to the light, and showed me, beneath the case, the faintest crescent of verdigris upon the head of a hidden screw. The back was lately opened, the hand set by a finger that did not trouble to wipe itself. Noon, yesterday, was chosen. The calendar left untouched, the newspaper turned to the very advertisement he read then. A room can be arranged as a stage is. "And the body?" I whispered, looking towards the sheet. "The doctor says exposure. Exposure is a word for the consequence, not the cause. In what theatre, Watson, do we find sudden cold without open night wind, in the company of salt and water, in the transmigration of heat by artifice, in a fishmonger's crate that arrives at 10 and departs unemptied, yet leaves the hall wet? Add to this a soporific of a sweetish odour, to prevent protest, a pane that can be reseated from without, and a lodger who wears india-rubber feet to step where snow leaves no arithmetic." Evans swallowed audibly. "Sir, the captain is a gentleman." "Undoubtedly," said Holmes. "We shall let him prove it. Lestrade, you will oblige me by sending a man to Deacon's with my card, and the hour of their deliveries to Northumberland Heath these past 3 days, another to Holborn to request Mr. Tovey's attendance here at 3, and a third to Miss Lydia Quill with the same. Evans, you will take me to the coal cellar." "The coal cellar?" Lestrade and I exclaimed together. "The coal cellar," Holmes repeated, and the line of his mouth curved very slightly. "When a man wishes to import winter into a single room of a house, he does not cool the street. He cools the corridor by which that winter must pass. I am curious to see whether yesterday brushed its coat there as it came through." Evans led the way down a narrow stair whose chill deepened at every step, the lantern he carried casting a feeble yellow cone upon the whitewashed wall. The air grew damp, and the faint, acrid tang of coal dust mingled with something else, an odour faintly medicinal, reminiscent of an apothecary's shelf. Holmes, walking last, paused upon the final tread, his hand lightly resting upon the banister as though listening to the very silence of the place. "Do not stir the heap," he said to Evans. "Watson, keep the light steady." The cellar was small, its flagged floor half covered by the black mound of coal which rose almost to the level of my waist. Along the far wall, a rough shelf held kindling, 2 empty sacks and a battered tin pail. But Holmes's attention fixed upon the patch of flooring near the coal, where the dust was disturbed, and a trail of powdery residue glimmered pale under the lantern. He stooped, touched it lightly, and brought his finger to the light. "Salt again," he murmured, "and fresh within the day. Observe, Watson, here where the stone dips slightly, the moisture has gathered in a shallow pool and dried into a rim of crust. This is no coalman's doing. Salt has no business in a cellar, unless it be for curing, and Ambrose Quill was no preserver of hams." Lestrade leaned closer, peering into the gloom. "You're saying the body was carried through here?" Holmes smiled faintly. "Not carried, Inspector. Introduced. You will remember the crate that came at 10. It stood in the hall, wet with melted ice. What is ice but frozen water? And what is salt's chief office in commerce but to keep ice from yielding too soon? I believe we are standing in the place where the crate was filled and emptied." "Filled with what?" I asked. "With the chill of yesterday," Holmes answered, his voice low and deliberate. "With the relics of a contrivance designed to bring the temperature of one room to that of the grave. Come, let us test a conjecture." He began to examine the wall nearest the coal heap, running his fingertips along the bricks. After a moment he halted at a small iron grill set low near the floor. Its frame bore scratches, as though some implement had lately been prized against it. He lifted his lens, studied the edge, and gave a brief nod. "The aperture," he said. "Notice, Watson, how it opens behind the study hearth. This vent should carry warmth from the grate into the cellar, but someone has reversed the process. The draught moves outward. The damper above has been shifted." I bent and felt the faint current of cold air upon my cheek. "Good heavens!" I exclaimed. "Then the study was chilled deliberately from below!" "Precisely. A current of frigid air, drawn from ice packed here, could turn that upper chamber into a tomb within the hour. A simple yet diabolical application of physics." Holmes turned to Evans, who stood staring in horror. "Who has handled this vent, my good man?" "No one, sir, not to my knowing. I sweep here but once a week." "Indeed? Then your lodger is an industrious fellow." Holmes's tone sharpened. "You told us Captain Penrith kept his own lamp. Did he also request access to this cellar?" Evans hesitated. "He said once, sir, he liked to fetch his own coal for the stove in his room. I thought no harm." "None, save to your master?" said Holmes grimly. "A soldier would know the value of discipline and of concealment." We returned to the hall where Lestrade, muttering under his breath, dispatched a constable to watch the gate. Holmes went to the study once more, and there his gaze roved about the shelves until it settled upon a small, brass-bound casket upon the escritoire. He lifted the lid. Inside lay several slips of parchment, a seal, and a sheet of vellum inscribed in a fine, angular hand. He read a few lines and passed it to me. It was a fragment of a manuscript, Latin, I thought, bearing what appeared to be annotations in Quill's writing. Marginal notes referred to Tovey dispute, authenticity of folio, and at the bottom a scrawl, destroy copy if proof confirmed. Holmes tapped the sheet with his forefinger. "A man killed not for gold but for parchment, Watson. Knowledge is a blade sharper than steel. Let us see who feared to feel its edge." A knock sounded at the door, and Mrs. Hudson's country cousin, the constable left to guard the lane, admitted a trim young woman wrapped in a dark cloak, the niece, Lydia Quill. Her eyes, reddened from weeping, lit with suspicion when she beheld us. "Who are you?" she demanded. "I am Sherlock Holmes, acting in concert with Scotland Yard," Holmes replied gently. "We mourn your uncle, Miss Quill, but if justice is to speak, we must first let truth be heard. Tell me, who might profit by his death?" She hesitated, drawing her cloak tighter. "Uncle Ambrose was a difficult man, Mr. Holmes. He loved his books more than people. I had hoped, perhaps foolishly, that he would forgive certain debts of my late father's, but he would not. Yet I never wished him harm. Captain Penrith dined with us twice. He seemed courteous, if proud. Uncle disliked him, said he had the eye of a man who gambles with his conscience." "Did you ever see them quarrel?" "Only once. The captain brought a parcel one night. A volume, he said, was from India, written on papyrus. Uncle grew pale when he saw it. They went into the study and shut the door. Later, I heard voices raised. When the captain left, he carried the parcel away again. Uncle would not speak of it." Holmes exchanged a swift glance with me. "And this was when?" "3 nights ago." "Thank you, Miss Quill. Your candour will serve him better than silence." He bowed slightly. "Inspector, you perceive how our net tightens. The captain returns from the East with a treasure of ink and fibre, offering it to a scholar who refuses the bargain. The scholar dies, his studies sealed in ice, and the manuscript dispute conveniently extinguished. The line between commerce and crime grows exceedingly thin." Lestrade scratched his head. "But where is your captain now?" "Absent, yet near enough to feel the cold wind of his own making," said Holmes. "He will return for the relic he failed to destroy." He stooped suddenly to the hearth, plucked a fragment of charred string from the ash, and held it up. "You see, Watson? The residue of a seal. Our paper wedge in the grate is no accident. It was part of a scroll or folio. The outer portion burned, the inner preserved by moisture, perhaps from ice or saline vapour. The captain's task was incomplete." He rose, his eyes alight with that strange fire I had come to recognize as the herald of pursuit. "Watson, we dine lightly tonight. There is work to be done before dawn. I believe the captain's footprints, though masked by galoshes, will leave a trail upon the conscience of commerce itself. Lestrade, keep your men within call, but silent. We shall bait our door to yesterday and see who dares to open it again." The night deepened about Northumberland Heath, and with it came a frost, sharper than the last. The constables had taken their stations in the garden, and at the gate, their breath rising in the lamplight like smoke from some invisible fire. Within, Holmes sat motionless before the darkened hearth, his long fingers steepled, his gaze fixed upon the pale wedge of unburned paper that lay under glass upon the table. The silence was such that I could hear the faint ticking of the mantel clock, now repaired to the correct hour, and the soft creak of wood as the cold tightened its grip upon the house. "You perceive, Watson," said Holmes at last, "that we are not waiting for the captain merely. We are waiting for the repetition of an idea. The criminal mind, like the artist's, cannot resist the perfection of its own design. Our adversary created a drama, an illusion of time reversed, of a man sealed in his yesterday. Such a craftsman must return to his theatre, if only to admire the work." He rose abruptly, crossing to the window, where a faint frost had begun to trace its silver fern work upon the panes. "Observe this pattern. The moisture rises from below, the cellar vent we found. Yet here the cold creeps inward. The balance of air has changed since the fire was relit. Somewhere a passage stands open that should be closed. The house itself tells us that the stage is being set anew." I started to speak, but the sound of a distant latch silenced me. Lestrade, stationed by the door, made a motion for quiet. A faint creak followed, then a stealthy tread upon the tiles of the hall. Holmes's face, illuminated by the faint glow of the lamp, had taken on that peculiar intensity I knew so well. He seemed not a man, but an instrument, every nerve attuned to a single vibration. The door opened with slow care, and into the lamplight stepped a tall figure muffled in a heavy coat. His gloved hands were pale with frost. His hat brim was dusted with rime. It was Captain Penrith. For an instant he stood, blinking against the glow, as though uncertain whether the house were real. Then his eyes fell upon the covered shape of Ambrose Quill, and he gave a short, stifled cry. "What is this?" he demanded hoarsely. "Who dares to intrude here?" Holmes advanced, quiet and deliberate. "You have returned, Captain, as I knew you would. Men who tamper with time are ever haunted by its remains." Penrith's hand moved instinctively toward his breast pocket. Lestrade was before him in a bound. "None of that, sir," he barked, wrenching away the small revolver, half drawn from beneath the coat. The captain drew himself up with a soldier's stiffness, his face pale as the snow outside. "This is an outrage. I came for my effects. I had no knowledge of Mr. Quill's death until I was told in the village not an hour ago." "Then your absence at dawn was most commendable foresight," said Holmes evenly. "Perhaps you will enlighten us as to why a crate from a Deptford fishmonger was brought to this house at your instruction, filled with salt and ice." "I know nothing of it." "Indeed. Then perhaps you also know nothing of the chloroform rag discovered in the cupboard, nor of the vent you so cleverly reversed between the cellar and the study. You are well-travelled, Captain. Familiar, no doubt, with the preservation of specimens by artificial cold. Did you think science would lend dignity to murder?" For the first time, the man's composure faltered. "You speak madness," he said, thickly. "I came to collect a manuscript, my property, not his." Holmes turned to the table, lifted the unburned wedge of paper, and held it up to the lamplight. "This, I think, is what you came to recover. A fragment of the folio which Mr. Quill refused to authenticate. A forgery so precise that only a scholar of his caliber could have unmasked it. You deceived many men in Calcutta, Captain, but not this one. And when he threatened to expose you, you contrived that yesterday itself should rise and silence him." Lestrade stepped forward. "That'll do, Mr. Holmes. I'll have the man's statement down at the yard." "Not yet," said Holmes sharply. "If we seize him now, we lose the last proof. The forgery alone is motive, but motive without mechanism is conjecture. Let him speak. His tongue will hang him faster than your warrant." The captain's eyes darted from one to another of us. "You believe me guilty of this horror? Then know the truth. I brought the papyrus only to prove its worth. Quill swore it was stolen property. I told him he would regret his slander. When I left him that night, he was alive. Alive! Do you hear? The snow will show I never returned." Holmes smiled faintly. "The snow, yes. It is the perfect witness for an imperfect alibi. You wore galoshes that left no mark, Captain, and you moved by flagstones and cellars. But snow betrays even what it cannot touch. It changes the air, holds the scent, records the temperature. Your door to yesterday was a masterpiece, yet you overlooked the breath of your own crime." "What breath?" Lestrade muttered. Holmes pointed to the frost on the inside of the pane. When he packed the ice below and opened the vent, the warm air of the study condensed upon the inner glass. That pattern, Watson, was formed while Ambrose Quill still breathed. When we arrived this morning, the frost remained, but the vent was sealed. Only one who knew the trick could have closed it again. And that, Captain, was you. returning to ensure your handiwork endured." Penrith's face had gone ashen. He made a half-step toward the door, but Lestrade caught his arm. Holmes regarded him with neither triumph nor pity, only a grave detachment. "There are crimes of passion," he said softly, "and crimes of intellect. Yours, Captain, was the latter, a duel of scholarship and deceit. You sought to preserve your reputation as one preserves fish on ice. But truth, like fire, thaws every counterfeit. Take him, Lestrade." The inspector snapped his fingers, and 2 constables emerged from the hall. As they led the prisoner away, the captain's voice rang out, hoarse and wild. "He would have ruined me! You cannot understand. You, with your smug justice and your spectacles. I meant only to frighten him, only to chill the air." His words broke into a laugh that was not laughter at all. Holmes turned back to the hearth and with a match kindled the laid fire. The flames caught quickly, crackling up the chimney as if eager to banish the lingering cold. "There," he murmured, "yesterday is finally gone." He stood watching the blaze, his lean profile touched with light. "Watson," he said after a moment, "there is a curious symmetry in human folly. The man who would forge a past ends by freezing his future." I made no reply. Outside, the wind rose again, sweeping through the leafless hedges and scattering the last snow from the gate of Ambrose Quill's house. Within, the fire burned steadily, and for the first time since our arrival, the chill of yesterday gave way to the warmth of today. Morning crept slowly over Baker Street, grey and reluctant after the night's bitter chill. I found Holmes at his customary post before the fire, a cup of untouched coffee beside him and the morning edition of the Times folded across his knee. The case of Ambrose Quill had made small print under the heading "Curious Death at Northumberland Heath," its details distorted, its conclusions, of course, erroneous. Holmes's expression betrayed neither irritation nor amusement, only a grave absorption as though some strand still hung loose in the web he had so deftly woven. "You do not eat, Holmes," I observed, setting down my own plate. "You have worked 3 nights without proper rest. Surely the case is finished now that Penrith has been taken into custody?" "Finished?" He looked up sharply. "My dear Watson, a case is never finished until its silence is complete, and this one hums yet with a discord I cannot name." He rose and paced to the window. Outside, London was waking to its workaday murmur, the carts rumbling, the newsboys shouting, but Holmes's gaze was fixed inward. "We have the means and the man, but the motive, Watson. There lies the hairline crack. You remember the fragment of vellum from the grate?" "Perfectly." He drew from his pocket a small sealed envelope and tapped it lightly. "Lestrade sent this by express not an hour ago. The residue of the ink upon that fragment, when treated with gall solution, reveals a curious thing. It was not written by Ambrose Quill, but by another hand, one untrained, in Latin. There are errors so elementary that even a schoolboy would blush. Does that strike you as consistent with the captain's boast of scholarship? It proves, perhaps, that the forgery was clumsier than we supposed. Or that the forgery was not his at all," said Holmes quietly. "We assumed that Penrith sought to silence Quill for exposing him. But what if Quill was never his adversary? What if both were but instruments of another, one who knew how to pit intellect against vanity until both were undone?" I confess the suggestion startled me. "You mean there was a third hand in this?" Holmes smiled faintly, the thin, quick smile that often preluded illumination. "Consider Lydia Quill, Watson, a dependent niece, shut out from inheritance, who watches her uncle reject every plea, who welcomes a stranger with a tempting relic that promises wealth a young woman, intelligent, observant, accustomed to her uncle's moods. What better intermediary to introduce Captain Penrith? And the fatal papyrus? I began to protest, but Holmes raised his hand. No accusation, only a thought. There are always thoughts between the lines. You will recall she told us her uncle and the captain quarrelled 3 nights ago, that she overheard but a portion. Yet the study, as we found it, bore no trace of such conflict. The paper wedge, preserved from the fire, was the inner layer of a scroll, the outer burned completely. Suppose, Watson, that she, who knew her uncle's schedule and solitude, retrieved that inner layer for her own ends, intending to sell it later once the scandal cooled. You suggest she— Patience. It is conjecture still. He turned from the window. Yet something more tangible presents itself. Lestrade telegraphs that the captain, before his arrest, had sent 2 registered parcels from Charing Cross, both to the same address in Paris, both declared as personal documents. One no doubt was genuine, the other perhaps the original Quill manuscript, but there is more. This morning's train manifest lists Miss Lydia Quill, booked for the same route, under the name Lydia Rowntree. Our daughter yesterday, Watson, may open upon today's departure. Within the hour we were on the platform at Charing Cross, the air thick with steam and the shrill calling of porters. Holmes moved like a hound upon scent, his keen eyes darting among the faces. Presently he touched my arm. "There," he whispered. Near the second-class carriage stood Lydia Quill, her figure slender beneath a travelling cloak, a small trunk at her feet. Her composure was perfect, too perfect, perhaps. Holmes approached with a quiet civility that belied the keenness of his pursuit. "Miss Quill, how fortunate! We were just remarking upon your absence from the inquest." She turned, startled but not shaken. "Mr. Holmes, I was advised there was nothing more I could add. I am returning to friends in France." "So soon, when your uncle lies scarcely buried, and the matter that robbed him of breath still trembles unresolved?" Holmes's tone was mild, but his eyes missed nothing. The tremor of her gloved hand, the flicker of her gaze toward the trunk. "Permit me a delicate question. You corresponded with Captain Penrith before his arrest, did you not?" "I?" Her colour rose. "He was my uncle's acquaintance, not mine. Yet your handwriting appears on a slip of forwarding address found among his effects." Holmes produced a folded paper. "See here. Rue de l'Abbaye, Paris. It is in the same hand, I think, as the marginal notes upon that fragment from the fire." For a moment she said nothing. The station's clamour seemed to fade, leaving only the faint hiss of the engine. Then she drew herself up, her chin high. "If you think to make me the villain of this tragedy, you err, Mr. Holmes. I loved my uncle, despite his hardness. The captain deceived us both. I only sought to retrieve what was mine by right, my father's letters, sold without consent. If I used the captain's acquaintance to gain them, it was not crime, but necessity." "Necessity is often the mother of invention," said Holmes softly. "And invention, Miss Quill, has many children, among them forgery. You see, the ink that clings to that burned folio matches the brand sold by Cartwrights of Holborn, who supply your uncle's household. The captain purchased his in India. It would bear a violet sheen, not black. There are small truths that speak loudly when one listens." She faltered, her poise wavering like a candle in draught. "What would you have me say?" "Only the truth," Holmes said, his voice gentling. "You contrived the quarrel, offered the captain the spurious scroll, and meant to profit by his ruin. But when you saw the danger turn mortal, you tried to recover the fragment that might condemn you. You came last night to the house, believing all asleep, and found us instead. The law will decide your measure of guilt, but your courage in facing it may yet redeem your cause." For a heartbeat, defiance flared again in her eyes, then died. She looked down, fingers twisting at her gloves. "He said it would only frighten him," she murmured. "I did not know it would kill." Lestrade, who had followed us quietly, stepped forward and took her arm. "Best come with me, miss. There'll be time enough for statements." Holmes watched as she was led away, the steam wreathing her figure till she seemed a ghost dissolving into air. Then he turned to me, the shadow of weariness on his face. "So ends our daughter yesterday, Watson. It opened upon greed, closed upon guilt, and left only the chill of human folly in its wake." The train whistle blew, a long, echoing cry that seemed to carry all of London's sorrows upon it. Holmes drew his collar up against the wind. "Come, my dear fellow, there is warmth in Baker Street yet, and perhaps another enigma waiting beyond today." The fog that night was thick upon the Strand, wrapping the gas lamps in dull halos of amber and drawing a muffled hush over the clatter of cabs. Holmes walked beside me in silence, his stride long and purposeful, the collar of his coat turned up to the bitter wind. The encounter at Charing Cross had left a peculiar shadow upon him, neither triumph nor weariness, but something inwardly restless, as if some fibre of the case yet lay unplucked. When at last we turned into Baker Street, the familiar yellow glow of our sitting-room windows seemed almost to beckon us toward warmth and clarity. Mrs. Hudson had left a small supper upon the table, but Holmes brushed it aside and went straight to his desk. From the inner pocket of his coat he drew a thin envelope sealed with red wax. "Lestrade pressed this upon me as we left the station," he said, breaking it open. "It contains the inventory of Miss Quill's effects, taken at the time of her detainment." I leaned forward as he unfolded the sheet. Among the usual trifles, a locket, a letter case, a few sovereigns, Holmes's finger halted upon one entry. A small brass key attached to a silk ribbon. He tapped the words thoughtfully. "There lies our final movement, Watson. The music has not ended yet." "Surely, Holmes, the matter is done? The captain's confession, Miss Quill's admission. What remains but the verdict?" Holmes's eyes met mine, alight once more with that quicksilver gleam I had come to know so well. "Confessions, my dear fellow, are the least reliable form of evidence. They tell us what a person wishes the world to believe, not always what truly occurred. Miss Quill's words bore the cadence of remorse, but not the substance of truth. Consider, she came to the station alone, yes, but where was the manuscript she claimed to have recovered? Where the letters she said were her father's? Neither were found in her luggage. Something else guided her flight. That key may well tell us to what. He snatched his hat once more and strode toward the door. "Come, Watson, the night is young, and memory, like crime, seldom sleeps soundly." Within the hour we stood again before the late Ambrose Quill's house, now shuttered and deserted. A constable, recognizing Holmes's credentials, admitted us with a lantern. The fire had long since burned to ash. The rooms smelled faintly of cold stone and extinguished life. Holmes ascended at once to the study, moving with unerring confidence through the dim corridors, as though the house itself had whispered its secrets to him. "Observe," he said, holding the lantern high. Our friend Lestrade removed all articles of value, yet one thing remains curiously untouched. He indicated a tall oak cabinet in the corner, the same that had stood beside Quill's writing desk during our first visit. "Locked when last we came, and now still locked." I examined it then and noted the faint rust upon its keyhole. Rust not natural to neglect, but to deliberate wetting, as with brine. Miss Quill's key may well fit this ward. He took from his pocket a small parcel, unwrapped it, and produced the brass key upon its ribbon. It turned easily in the lock, and the cabinet door swung open with a whisper. Inside were shelves filled not with books, as I had expected, but with narrow drawers labelled in Quill's precise hand. Holmes selected one at random, drew it forth, and spread its contents upon the desk, fragments of parchment, folded letters, and among them a small notebook bound in leather and sealed with wax. The seal bore the imprint of a serpent coiled about a quill. Holmes's expression hardened as he broke it. "You see the irony, Watson? The scholar who branded his work with the emblem of truth was himself ensnared by deception." He turned the pages slowly. They were filled with dense writing, neat and minute, each line accompanied by marginal notations in another rougher hand, Penrith's. Holmes read silently for several minutes before exhaling sharply. "So, the motive deepens. What is it, Holmes?" He laid the book open before me. "Here is the correspondence between Quill and a society calling itself the Order of the Thrice-Sealed Scroll, antiquarians, smugglers, and charlatans operating under the guise of scholarly exchange. Penrith was their courier, Quill their reluctant member. He was preparing to expose them when he died. And note, Watson, this page." He pointed to a line written in Quill's spidery script. "LQ has demanded half the proceeds or threatens disclosure. Her pressure increases. Must destroy originals if need be." "LQ?" I murmured. "Lydia Quill?" Or so we assumed, but no, observe the ink. The initial stroke of the L differs from the rest, as though corrected. It may as easily be E.Q. Evans, the manservant. Evans, but he seemed loyal, terrified even. Loyalty, Watson, is often a mask for guilt. Consider his peculiar fear that night, his evasions, his insistence that the crate was a mistake. Suppose he was no mere servant, but the true accomplice, the one who knew of the ice, the vent, the chloroform. Miss Quill may have suspected and tried to shield him, hence her haste to flee. Before I could reply, a sound echoed faintly from below. A soft creak, the unmistakable tread of a cautious foot upon wood. Holmes extinguished the lantern at once. We stood in darkness, hearing only the slow tick of the mantel clock and the faint rustle of air through the open cabinet. Another footstep followed, then the faint scratch of metal on stone. Holmes moved silently to the door, motioning for me to stay back. I caught the glimmer of his revolver as he slipped into the hall. The next instant a cry rang out, followed by the thud of a lantern dropped upon the floor. I dashed forward, and by the dim spill of moonlight from the stair window, saw Holmes grappling with a figure at the threshold, the heavy-set form of Evans himself. The constable, startled from his post, came running as the man wrenched free, but Holmes's hand shot out and caught him by the collar with the precision of a falcon striking its prey. When the lamp was relit, Evans stood trembling, his face grey with defeat. In his coat pocket, Holmes drew forth a folded packet, still damp from concealment. The missing manuscript. "So," said Holmes quietly, "the servant returns to his master's house not from loyalty but from greed. Tell me, Evans, was it worth the chill of yesterday to fetch the price of a lie?" The man's lips worked soundlessly. "I only wanted my share," he muttered. He promised. Captain said there'd be money enough for both, but Quill turned on us. He meant to tell the police, said the scroll was cursed, that no good would come of it. The captain said he'd scare him, make him beg forgiveness. I didn't know it would kill him, sir. I swear I didn't." Holmes's gaze was unreadable. "Fear and folly are poor partners, Evans. One chills the heart, the other clouds the reason. Between them, they make murder." The constable led the man away, his sobs echoing faintly down the stair. Holmes remained silent for a long moment, staring at the open cabinet and the serpent seal upon the desk. "Watson," he said at last, "you perceive how even the smallest falsity breeds its own weather, a forged line, a whispered threat, and soon all of yesterday's warmth turns to ice." He closed the notebook gently, his fingers lingering upon its cover, as though feeling the pulse of a vanished mind. "Come, my dear fellow, we have thawed this matter enough. Let us leave the ghosts of yesterday to their rest." The constable's lantern light wavered along the corridor as Evans was led away, his shadow shrinking and stretching against the walls like some spirit retreating from judgment. When the echo of footsteps had faded, Holmes stood quite still in the study, his expression not one of victory, but of deep abstraction. The air had grown heavy with the faint, bitter odour of extinguished coal, and the faint glimmer of frost still clung to the corners of the window pane, stubborn remnants of the crime's unnatural chill. "There remains one aspect that troubles me, Watson," he said at length, turning from the hearth. "We have seen the human agents, the captain, the servant, and the woman, but not yet the hand that moved them. The order of the thrice-sealed scroll was no fiction. Quill wrote as a man who feared his own correspondence. Fear, my dear fellow, is rarely solitary. It is the echo of pursuit." He drew the serpent-marked notebook from his pocket once more and placed it upon the desk. "Look here, these entries stop abruptly 2 days before Quill's death, yet the tone of his final note suggests he had made discovery enough to destroy the entire cabal. The clue lies not in what he wrote, but in what he withheld." I leaned over the page he indicated. Beneath a half-finished sentence, "The final proof lies within the..." But the pen had scored a dark line, then ceased. "Within the what, Holmes? Precisely, within the what?" He smiled faintly, though his eyes had grown keen. "Now consider where we stand, Watson. The man who collected rare manuscripts, the scholar who catalogued secrets, the forger who thought himself an artist, all played their parts within this room, and yet, amidst all their devices, one door remains unopened." He turned suddenly to the panelled wall behind the desk, tapping lightly with his cane. A hollow resonance answered. "You recall how I remarked upon the curious symmetry of this wall when first we entered? Observe the moulding. It continues here, yet the adjoining side is an inch thicker than elsewhere. Hand me that letter opener." I passed it to him, and with a quick, precise motion, he pressed it into the seam between panels. The wood yielded slightly, then sprang back with a soft click. A narrow section swung outward, revealing a cavity no larger than a cupboard. Within lay a stack of folios bound with cord, a small metal coffer, and, most strangely of all, a dried wreath of laurel tied with faded silk. Holmes lifted the coffer and placed it upon the table. The serpent emblem appeared again upon its lid, but in finer engraving, as though this were the true seal of the order. He tried the latch. It held fast. Then, with the deftness of long practice, he took from his waistcoat pocket a thin strip of tempered steel and inserted it beneath the clasp. A soft snap followed, and the lock gave way. Inside lay several folded documents, a vial of some dark, resinous substance, and a curious device resembling a miniature press. Holmes examined each in turn, his expression hardening. "This, Watson, is a machine for impressing seals upon parchment. See the rotary mechanism. The order used it to give false authenticity to spurious manuscripts. The resin here, once heated, would take the stamp of any seal, royal, monastic, or private." Ambrose Quill was to expose this practice. His murder silenced not only him, but the evidence of the crime. "And yet," I said. Evans confessed. What more could remain? Holmes's eyes glimmered beneath the lamplight. The servant was but a pawn. The hand that placed this coffer here knew precisely what must be hidden and where. Evans could not have managed such concealment. His confession spoke only of money. There is another mind at work, a colder intellect, content to let others burn while it stands apart in shadow. Look! He held up one of the folded papers. This bears an address in cipher, not Paris as we supposed, but Constantinople. Constantinople, I exclaimed. Surely you do not mean— I mean, Watson, he interrupted quietly, that this affair touches something wider than we imagined. The forged scroll was no random trifle of antiquarian deceit. It was one piece in a chain that stretches across Europe. The order dealt not merely in counterfeit relics, but in information disguised as scripture. A message passed through monasteries, libraries, and collectors' vaults under the very noses of governments. Ambrose Quill, the conscientious scholar, stumbled upon the truth, and so they made of him a lesson. He drew a deep breath, his fingers tightening around the coffer. We must tread carefully now. To expose this fully might topple more than one reputation held dear in Parliament and beyond. It may also bring peril to those who pry too far. A sharp knock at the outer door startled us. The constable, pale and anxious, entered. "Beg pardon, sir," he said, addressing Holmes, "but there's a messenger from the yard. Urgent." Holmes took the slip of paper offered and read it by the lamplight. For a moment he stood motionless, then handed it to me. It bore only a few words, hastily scrawled in Lestrade's hand. Penrith dead, poison taken in cell. Left note mentioning the serpent that never sleeps. Holmes's face remained inscrutable. So the serpent bites its own tail. How fitting! The order silences its weak link before the chain may break. "You think they reached him even in custody?" I asked. "Undoubtedly. The method is classical. A capsule of quick poison sewn into a garment hem. Military habit, Watson, a relic of certain Eastern services. Our captain carried his own silence with him." He began to pace, every movement charged with suppressed energy. They move swiftly. If Penrith is dead, Evans may not live long enough to reach the dock. Miss Quill's remorse may soon turn to terror if she grasps how near the serpent coils. "What can be done?" Holmes halted before the fire, his expression grave but resolute. "We must strike before they do. There is yet one address left unvisited, the name inscribed within Quill's final note." He opened the notebook once more and traced the last unfinished line. Beneath it, so faint as to be almost invisible, was a single flourish. Abbeygate. "Watson," he said, slipping the coffer beneath his arm, "you may wish you had never heard of this case before dawn breaks, but if I am right, the door that opened to yesterday leads not only to the dead, but to those who still walk among us. Fetch your revolver, we go to St. Albans Abbey, at once." Outside, the fog had thickened again, swallowing the lamps one by one. As we stepped into the hansom, Holmes leaned close and murmured, "Remember, my dear friend, every man who guards a secret builds his own cell. Let us see who has locked himself behind this one." The driver flicked his reins, and the cab rattled off into the darkness, leaving the silent house of Ambrose Quill to its long, frozen rest. The journey to St. Albans was one of those long, silent vigils that seemed to stretch outside time itself. The cab rattled through the empty London streets, the gas lamps flickering dimly through the fog like dying stars, and Holmes sat opposite me, his gaze fixed not upon the window, but somewhere far beyond it. The small iron coffer lay upon his knees, its serpent emblem catching what little light there was, and the rhythmic jolt of the wheels beneath us seemed to match the measured cadence of his thought. "Abbeygate," he murmured once, half to himself. "Not a metaphor, Watson, but a direction. The monastic archives at St. Albans have long served as a discreet repository for those who value secrecy under the cloak of sanctity. The order would find sanctuary there, if anywhere. I knew better than to interrupt. Holmes's mind, when upon such a trail, moved like the current of a river, silent above, relentless below. Only when the dawn began to show as a dim silvering at the horizon did he stir, striking his fist softly against his knee. "Yes," he said. "It fits precisely. The forgeries, the manuscripts, the international reach, all converge upon the Abbey's ancient library. And if Quill meant to deliver his proof to any place of safety, it would have been there." We reached the outskirts of St. Albans just as the cathedral bell tolled 6. The air was raw and still, the fog lifting slowly from the fields. Holmes paid the driver, and together we walked through the narrow cobbled streets that led to the Abbey precincts. The great Norman tower loomed above us, sombre and vast, its stones stained with the memory of centuries. A sleepy verger, lantern in hand, met us at the cloister gate and stared in astonishment as Holmes presented his card. "By what right do you enter the Abbey at this hour, sir?" "By the right of inquiry into a matter that touches both life and death," Holmes replied crisply. "If you prefer, fetch the sub-warden. Tell him it concerns the legacy of Ambrose Quill." The man's eyes widened at the name, and without a word he vanished through an arched passage. In a few minutes he returned with a tall, spare clergyman whose austere face bore the marks of sleepless study. "You spoke of Ambrose Quill," he said gravely. "He was here 3 days past. He deposited with us a sealed package for safekeeping in our charter room. Why do you ask of him?" "Because he lies dead," Holmes answered quietly. "And his death was not of natural cause. The package he left may hold the key to that mystery." The clergyman's expression darkened. "This is grievous news indeed. Come with me." He led us through a low, vaulted corridor, our footsteps echoing faintly on the worn flags, until we reached a heavy oak door banded with iron. From his ring of keys he selected one and turned it in the lock. The door opened upon a small chamber lined with presses and strong boxes. In the centre, upon a stone table, lay a wooden chest bearing a label in Quill's hand, to be opened only by those who seek the truth beneath falsehood. Holmes's eyes glinted. A fitting epitaph. He examined the seal. It was identical to that upon the serpent coffer. With the clergyman's assent, he broke it carefully and lifted the lid. Inside lay a folio of papers, several scrolls, and a single envelope addressed simply to S. Holmes, Esquires, in Quill's unmistakable script. For a moment even Holmes seemed taken aback. He broke the seal and unfolded the letter. "My dear Mr. Holmes," it began, "if you read these lines, I am beyond your help. I have long suspected that my life will end before my work is done, yet I write in the hope that you, whose renown has reached even our cloisters, may finish what I began. The order of the thrice-sealed scroll has its roots not in scholarship but in espionage. For years, forged texts have been used to conceal political correspondence, treaties, arms dealings, even bribes, passed across Europe under the guise of ancient wisdom. The serpent seal marks their cipher. I have uncovered much, but not the name of their English patron. He hides in plain sight among men of rank and letters and bears the title of custodian. If I fall, the evidence lies within these walls. Seek the truth at your own peril. The custodian guards it still." Holmes read the letter aloud, his voice even but taut with restrained excitement. "Watson," he said softly, "we stand at the edge of a labyrinth, and the monster has not yet shown its face." He turned to the remaining folios. They were filled with transcriptions of manuscripts, each bearing the serpent emblem, but interspersed among them were pages of political import, letters signed in code, references to foreign agents, and, most remarkably, a list of initials written in Quill's hand. Holmes scanned the list rapidly, then stopped short, his eyes narrowing. "Here, CM, Custodian, Royal Society." He drew in a breath. "Charles Mortlake, Watson. A name we have encountered before. You recall the case of the missing embassy cipher 2 years ago?" "Indeed, the same Mortlake who was said to have resigned under mysterious circumstances." "The same? And now we find him beneath the serpent's coil." Holmes's fingers tightened upon the parchment. "It was he who orchestrated the Order's English chapter. Quill uncovered his dealings and paid with his life. Penrith, the obedient courier, carried out his bidding. Evans, the tool of both, finished what his masters began. But Mortlake, he remains, hidden behind his veneer of respectability." At that moment, a faint sound echoed through the chamber, the creak of a hinge, soft but distinct. Holmes's head snapped up, the clergyman's lantern flickered as a current of cold air swept through the doorway. "Who is there?" the sub-warden called. No answer came, but the faint shuffle of retreating steps told us all we needed to know. Holmes was at the door in an instant, his coat flaring behind him as he darted into the corridor. I followed close, the echoes of our pursuit ringing through the cloisters. Ahead, a shadow moved swiftly toward the outer gate. "Stop him, Watson!" Holmes cried. I caught only a glimpse, a tall figure cloaked in black, his hat pulled low, the gleam of metal in his hand as he flung open the gate. A flash, a sharp report, and the lantern shattered beside me. The man vanished into the mist beyond the courtyard wall. Holmes stood still, breathing hard, his face pale in the half-light. "So," he said quietly, "the custodian watches his own secrets too closely to let them breathe. He has our scent now, Watson, and unless I misjudge him, he will strike again before the day is done." The great bell tolled once more above us, deep and solemn, echoing through the cloisters as if tolling not only for Ambrose Quill but for whoever next dared open the door to yesterday. The echo of the shot seemed to linger long after its sound had died, absorbed by the stone walls and then swallowed by the heavy morning air. Holmes stood motionless in the cloister, one hand against the cold pillar, his eyes fixed upon the mist where the fleeing figure had vanished. The fog beyond the gate was thick, its billowing folds already hiding any trace of the intruder's passage. The only sign that violence had indeed been done was the shattered lantern at my feet, its flame extinguished, and the smell of burnt oil rising faintly in the damp. Holmes broke the silence first, his voice low and even. "No blood, no body, no trail. Our custodian knows how to cover his exit. That was a warning, Watson. A courteous one, if you will. He prefers deterrence to disorder. The man we pursue is no desperate criminal. He is a strategist." He retrieved a small scrap from the flagstones where the man had stood, a piece of waxed paper, curled and torn. Upon its inner side was impressed the faint outline of a serpent's head. Holmes turned it over between his fingers, studying it as if it were the very key to the universe. "Wax from the same seal as the coffer," he said at last. "He must have been watching us from the first. He feared not the police but the truth itself being touched by unfamiliar hands. The custodian is cleaning his ledgers, Watson, and we must make haste before he balances the last account." The sub-warden, pale and shaken, had been clutching the lantern handle all this while. "You will pursue him, Mr. Holmes? The Abbey grounds are vast, but if the man escaped beyond the gate, he can be intercepted upon the high road." Holmes shook his head. "No, sir. The fog is his ally, and pursuit would gain us nothing. Better that we guard what he sought to destroy." We returned to the charter room, and Holmes relocked the chest with deliberate care. "If he meant to silence these papers, we must see them safely conveyed to London at once," he said. I trust, Reverend, that your discretion is equal to your faith." "You may depend upon it," the clergyman replied. Outside, the daylight had strengthened but brought little warmth. As we made our way toward the small inn where our driver waited, Holmes walked in utter silence. The wheels of thought were visibly turning behind his impassive face. Only when we had taken our seats within the cab did he speak again. "The serpent wax, Watson, the very same compound Quill used to counterfeit seals. The custodian carries the original formula, I have no doubt. And mark my words, he will attempt one more forgery before this is done, not of parchment, but of circumstance. He will forge our understanding of the crime." "You mean to say he will try to frame another?" "Precisely. He has already prepared the stage." Holmes leaned back, fingers pressed together. He anticipated Quill's death, predicted the involvement of Scotland Yard, perhaps even calculated that I should be drawn in. Each move of ours must have been accounted for in his design, but even the cleverest mind leaves a shadow of intention. It is there I shall look. By the time we reached Baker Street, the morning had grown bright and bitter. Lestrade awaited us, his expression grim and his hands deep in his pockets. "I've bad news, Mr. Holmes," he said, the moment we entered. "Evans is dead. They found him in his cell just after sunrise. Same as Penrith. Poison. The surgeon says it was instantaneous." Holmes received the news with a faint tightening of the lips, but no outward surprise. "Then the custodian is thorough. He could not risk even a whisper between those two. Did Evans receive any visitors?" "None, save a note slipped through by a turnkey who swore it bore the Yard's own stamp. It was blank inside, no writing at all." "Blank," Holmes repeated softly, his eyes narrowing. "Ah, the elegance of it. A sheet dusted with resin, invisible until warmed by the hand, the very trick the order used to conceal its messages. Our serpent strikes again." He turned sharply to me. "Watson, fetch the coffer from my desk." I obeyed, setting it before him. Holmes opened it and took out the small vial of dark resinous substance. Holding it against the firelight, he examined the thick liquid within. "This," he said, "is their weapon and their shield, a formula capable of preserving ink or erasing it entirely, depending upon the heat applied. Quill discovered its composition, and that discovery doomed him, but in the wrong hands, why, it might alter the very record of truth itself." Lestrade looked from one to the other of us, baffled. "Then what are we to do, Mr. Holmes? If the man's this deep, we may as well be chasing a ghost." Holmes smiled faintly. "Ghosts are easier to catch than men who live by creating them. We must provoke him, Inspector, compel him to show his hand. Fortunately, he has left us the means." He drew from the inner pocket of his coat the letter Quill had addressed to him and laid it beside the serpent seal. "Observe, the custodian's pride lies in secrecy. He will not suffer the serpent emblem to appear in public, for it is both his signature and his shame. If an article were to appear in the Times tomorrow, suggesting the discovery of a sealed document bearing that same emblem, and further implying it would be opened under police supervision." Lestrade's eyes widened. "You'd smoke him out?" "Precisely. The serpent never sleeps, but it coils when threatened. He will come, or send his agent, to intercept what he believes to be the last surviving evidence of his crimes. When he does, we shall be waiting." He turned to me then, his tone softening. "Watson, you will remain at the Yard with Lestrade until evening. The article will appear by noon. I, meanwhile, must attend to a small errand in Mayfair. There are certain doors in that quarter that even serpents hesitate to enter, but I mean to open one nonetheless." "Mayfair?" I echoed. "You believe Mortlake hides there?" Holmes's lips curved in a thin smile. Where else should a custodian dwell but among the guardians of empire? If I am not mistaken, Mortlake will be found where knowledge and influence intertwine, in the house of the British Museum's private trustees. I fancy he will not greet me kindly. He snatched up his hat and cloak, and in another moment he was gone, leaving only the faint scent of tobacco and the echo of his words behind. Lestrade looked after him uneasily. "He's walking into the lion's den, that one. If this Mortlake's half what you say, he'll not go down easy." "Holmes seldom does anything easily," I said. "But he has a gift, Inspector. The lion rarely knows he's been trapped until the bars close around him." Lestrade grunted. "Well then, let's hope he brings his cage." The rest of the day passed in slow suspense. By noon, the notice Holmes had arranged appeared in the Times, a brief announcement hinting that documents connected with the late scholar Ambrose Quill and bearing an unusual seal were in police custody. By dusk, the yard was buzzing with inquiries from journalists and antiquarians alike. But through it all, my eyes remained fixed on the clock and the door, waiting for the familiar brisk step that would tell me Holmes had returned. When at last, near 9, the door swung open, Holmes entered, pale, dishevelled, and with a faint smear of dust upon his cheek, but his eyes alive with fire. He placed upon Lestrade's desk a sealed envelope marked "Confidential, Royal Society." "Gentlemen," he said quietly, "the custodian has taken the bait. He will come for this at midnight. I trust, Watson, that your revolver is in working order. The serpent is about to uncoil." The hands of the clock crept toward midnight with the slow inevitability of fate. The lamps in Lestrade's office burned low, their glow diffused through the fog that pressed thickly against the panes. Outside, the rain had begun, a steady whisper against the glass that made the silence within seem almost reverent. Holmes sat by the desk, motionless, save for the slow tapping of his forefinger upon the arm of the chair. The sealed envelope bearing the words "Confidential, Royal Society" lay conspicuously beneath the lamp, like bait placed upon a trap whose spring was invisible. Lestrade, pacing the floor in restless circles, paused to peer through the blind. "If your man means to come, Mr. Holmes, he'll have to hurry. There's not a soul stirring out there save the constable on the far corner." "He will come," said Holmes without looking up. "You mistake his nature, Lestrade. The custodian's courage is of the coldest sort, the courage that walks calmly into peril so long as it believes the odds are in its favour. It is precisely midnight he will choose. There is a certain symmetry in crime, as in art." I felt a tremor of anticipation. The night had gathered around us like a living thing, and even the ticking of the clock seemed subdued, as though time itself were holding its breath. I checked my revolver for the third time and took my post by the shadowed corner of the window, while Lestrade stationed a man at each exit. Holmes alone remained seated, his long fingers steepled, his eyes half closed in thought. The minute hand touched 12. At first there was nothing. Then faintly the sound of approaching wheels broke the stillness, a carriage stopping at the far end of Whitehall, its horses' hooves muffled by the wet street. A moment later footsteps approached, slow, deliberate, the measured tread of one who neither hurried nor hesitated. The handle of the outer door turned once, paused, then moved again with quiet assurance. The man who entered was tall, broad-shouldered, impeccably dressed in dark evening attire. He closed the door behind him with the courtesy of one entering a drawing-room rather than the heart of Scotland Yard. His gloved hands rested lightly upon the head of his umbrella. His face, pale and sharply cut, was framed by hair just touched with silver. "Good evening," he said, his tone smooth and unhurried. "I am Sir Charles Mortlake. I believe you have something that belongs to me." Lestrade stiffened, his hand hovering near his pocket, but Holmes rose before he could speak. "On the contrary," he said, "I believe, Sir Charles, that we have something that may yet save you from yourself." Mortlake's gaze flicked to the envelope upon the desk, then back to Holmes. His smile was faint, controlled. "You are a remarkable man, Mr. Holmes. It was a risk to come here, I grant you, but a necessary one. My work concerns matters of national importance, documents whose exposure might imperil England's peace. I trust the police will not interfere with affairs of such delicacy." Holmes inclined his head slightly. "A delicate affair indeed, though I fear its threads are woven less with patriotism than with profit. The order of the thrice-sealed scroll has been a most efficient mechanism for moving contraband information beneath the veil of scholarship. Ambrose Quill discovered as much and paid the price." For the first time, a flicker of colour touched Mortlake's cheeks. "I do not answer to innuendo." "No?" Holmes's voice hardened. "Then answer to fact. The serpent seal found in Quill's study, your design, the forged papyrus, your commission, Penrith, your agent, Evans, your servant's accomplice, each silenced at your order the moment they outlived their usefulness. You had the means, the knowledge, and the audacity, but you made one. Error, Sir Charles. You believed intellect would hide conscience." Mortlake's smile returned, colder than before. "You speak as if you had proof." "I have more than proof," said Holmes softly. "I have your pattern. You could not resist it. When Quill sent his letter to me, he sealed it with the serpent mark, knowing it would sting your pride. The same wax lies upon your glove this very moment." Mortlake's hand moved instinctively, and Holmes's eyes gleamed. "A trace of resin dust upon your cuff, faint but distinctive, the same substance used to render invisible ink. You came here to recover the envelope not because of what it contains, but because of what might appear when it is warmed." With a sudden motion, Holmes took the envelope from the desk and held it near the lamp. Slowly, beneath the gentle heat, lines began to emerge, dark, curling letters forming words invisible before. Lestrade and I leaned closer. The message was brief, but damning. "Mortlake authorizes payment upon delivery. Same cipher applies, Q." Holmes's voice was quiet, but terrible. "A single letter of consent, Sir Charles, the serpent's own signature." For a long moment Mortlake stood immobile. Then, with the speed of a striking snake, he drew a small revolver from within his coat. "You clever fool," he hissed. "Do you imagine men of my standing will hang upon your word?" Before I could move, Holmes had already shifted aside, the motion as fluid as a dancer's. The shot cracked through the air, shattering the glass shade of the lamp. In that instant of confusion, Lestrade sprang forward, grappling with Mortlake. The revolver clattered to the floor. I rushed to assist, and together we forced him back against the desk. He struggled once, twice, and then sagged, defeated. Holmes retrieved the fallen weapon with care and placed it upon the table. His face was pale, his expression unreadable. "You see, Sir Charles," he said softly, "even the serpent, when cornered, must strike blindly." Mortlake gave a short, bitter laugh. "You think this ends with me? The order is older than you imagine, and its roots run deeper than the law. You have slain one head, Mr. Holmes, but the serpent will rise again." "Perhaps," said Holmes, "but not tonight." Lestrade's men led him away, his words echoing faintly down the corridor like the fading whisper of prophecy. When silence returned, Holmes stood before the broken lamp, staring at the wavering flame that had survived the gunshot. "There is always another coil, Watson," he said at last, his voice low, almost weary. Evil, like knowledge, never dies. It merely changes its script. I placed a hand upon his shoulder. And yet tonight you have unmasked it once more. He gave a small nod. For now. Quill's work will be preserved, the serpent's circle broken, at least until another age finds use for its poison. He glanced toward the window, where dawn had begun to stain the fog with a faint grey light. Let us be content, my dear friend. Yesterday has closed its door. What lies beyond it, the future must decide. We left the yard together as the first carriage rattled through the waking streets. The rain had ceased, and over the city, pale streaks of morning stretched like parchment awaiting a new hand to write upon it. Holmes walked in silence, his coat trailing in the breeze, and I, watching him in that dim, uncertain light, felt once again that strange mixture of awe and melancholy that always followed his victories, the sense that in unravelling the secrets of others he had somehow brushed against the shadow of his own. The pale dawn had strengthened into full morning when Holmes and I returned to Baker Street. The fog had lifted at last, leaving the pavement slick and gleaming, and the first cries of the day's vendors rose faintly through the crisp air. Inside our familiar sitting room, the fire burned low, casting a gentle glow upon the cluttered tables, the violin resting across the chair, and the faint wreath of smoke curling above Holmes's chair, where he had already settled, cross-legged and silent. I poured him a cup of tea, though he scarcely seemed aware of it. His gaze was fixed on the thin curl of smoke rising from his pipe, as if in that ghostly spiral he could still see the pattern of all that had passed. At last he spoke, softly, as though thinking aloud. So ends the serpent's coil, Watson. Mortlake, Penrith, Evans, all threads of one design, and all now severed. And yet I cannot call it victory. We have laid bare a mechanism of deceit so intricate that it seems almost to possess a life of its own. Destroy one link, and another shapes itself from the dust. You did what no other man could have done, I said. You broke the circle. You gave justice to Quill. Holmes shook his head gently. Justice, perhaps. But truth is a fragile companion, easily bruised by those who claim to serve it. Quill sought to expose the corruption of knowledge, the sale of wisdom to power, and paid with his life. Mortlake's crime was not murder alone. It was the presumption that intellect grants immunity from morality. There is a certain poetic symmetry in his downfall, fitting that a man who built his power upon counterfeit scripture should be undone by a single line of invisible ink. He rose then, crossing to the window. The light fell upon his face, sharp against the shadows, and for a moment he seemed almost sculpted from the very clarity he pursued. "Do you recall, Watson," he said, "the phrase in Quill's letter? Seek the truth beneath falsehood. It might well serve as the motto of our profession. Each case teaches it anew that the world, for all its noise and reason, still hides its motives in silence. Mortlake was no fool. He merely forgot that concealment and discovery are twin forces, each giving birth to the other." He turned away from the window and came to stand beside the hearth, his manner softening as he regarded the dying embers. There was a moment last night when Mortlake raised his revolver that I saw in his eyes not hatred but resignation. He knew the game was lost the instant the ink appeared upon that envelope. I have seen it often, the instant when intellect gives way to fear, when the man who believed himself master of the board realizes he has been but one more piece. I could not help but smile faintly. "You speak as though you were almost sorry for him." "Sorry?" he considered. "Perhaps a little. There is something pitiable in genius misapplied, like a lamp burning in a sealed room, It consumes itself for want of air." He drew upon his pipe and exhaled slowly. "Yet one must remember, Watson, that even the most brilliant fire leaves only ash behind." For a time, neither of us spoke. The sounds of the city were growing louder now, the clatter of wheels, the bark of a newsboy crying the morning edition that no doubt carried Mortlake's arrest across London. The familiar rhythm of life had already resumed, indifferent to the dramas it occasionally absorbed. At length, Holmes set his pipe aside. "There remains but one debt to pay. Quill's papers will go to the British Museum, where they belong, not as relics of scandal, but as a warning to those who would mistake knowledge for virtue. I have written a brief memorandum for the trustees, omitting certain details of the order's existence. Some secrets, even when unmasked, are better left sleeping." "You mean the serpent may rise again?" Holmes smiled faintly, his eyes bright beneath the haze of smoke. "My dear fellow, serpents always rise again. It is in their nature to coil where darkness lingers. But for every serpent, there must also be one hand willing to lift the stone beneath which it hides. That, I suppose, will be our work for as long as there are stones left unturned." He seated himself once more, fingers steepled, the expression of quiet absorption returning to his features. "I have no doubt another case will come soon enough. Perhaps something smaller, more human, to wash the taste of this one from my mouth. The grand conspiracies of men are exhausting, Watson. Give me a good old-fashioned burglary or a missing bridegroom, and I shall feel quite restored." His tone lightened with that familiar touch of irony, and I could not help but laugh. "You mean to say you'd prefer a broken watch chain to a network of international spies?" "Precisely so," he replied, smiling thinly. "The watch chain will not shoot at one's head, nor leave philosophical puzzles in its wake." He reached for his violin and drew the bow lightly across the strings. A soft, wistful note filled the air, rising and falling like the final sigh of the night itself. "You see, Watson," he said between phrases, "the true reward of detection is not in the triumph, but in the pursuit. The moment when chaos yields its pattern and the impossible becomes inevitable. That moment, fleeting though it is the only peace my mind has ever known." The melody deepened, a quiet elegy for Ambrose Quill, for the lost, for the foolish, perhaps even for the guilty. When it faded, Holmes set down the bow and leaned back, his eyes half closed. "There, my dear friend," he murmured, "the serpent sleeps at last." And so it ended. The case of the door, that opened to yesterday, as all great cases end, not with celebration, but with reflection. The fog had lifted from London, yet in that quiet room I knew that somewhere, beyond the morning light, another door was already stirring upon its hinges, waiting for Sherlock Holmes to open it once again.